Hey everyone! Before we open today's file, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at d.s.radio, where you can find all the images that go along with today's case. You can drop us an email at contact.dsradio@gmail.com. You can find all of our socials in the Linktree bio on our Instagram profile, including links to merch. If you're feeling especially generous, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio, where you can get access to our exclusive Instagram page and make suggestions for upcoming episode topics that you would like us to cover. Speaking of Patreon, thanks to our Patreons, Riff Cult, Cropley Crab, Cash Broadus, Raspberry Jr., Jason R. Nelson, Creepy Paper, Jamie Sook, Michael Laughlin, Lindsay Keller, Mike Wright, Greer Weaver, Kelsey Carruthers, Linz Gibbon, Drake Holvig, Only Child, Michael M, Wesley Akers, Riaz K, Emily Medeiros, Pip, Heather Wynn, Graves, Devon Sweatshirt, The Ordained Sinister Minister, and Philip Hoffman. Hi everybody and welcome to Dystopian Simulation Radio. I'm your host Linz.
And I'm your other host Chris.
How's it going?
Good. Now I've finally got the recording to work.
Yeah, we've been sitting here for the best part of half an hour trying to set this up, and Chris had some very hilarious outbursts, which I wish we had recordings of, but
they're too hot for podcasting.
Yeah, he went uber Geordie. What have you been up to, Chris?
Well, it's been a little while since we last recorded. If you don't know, we batch record quite a lot of these just to help with the editing process and so on. Generally, I've just been getting ready to have a baby. How about you?
Oh, yeah. Well, that sounds great, Chris. You've reproduced and an alien is coming. And
Spawned.
Yeah. So it's good that we record in batches.
It is.
As we record this now, COVID restrictions lifted and World War III. Ignoring that for the moment, I've got a very interesting and distracting story for you, Chris.
Okay, so what are you going to fill me in on today?
Dolly Koschel was born to German immigrant parents in 1880 and grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a community of fellow German immigrants. She began working in a textile mill in the area at the age of 12. She was well liked at work, and besides being pretty and charming, she was also very diplomatic, with a knack for resolving arguments peacefully on the factory floor. Dolly was particularly liked by the factory owner,
Oh, no.
Mr. Fred William Oesterreich, whom she eventually married at the age of 17, becoming Dolly Oesterreich. The pair were much different in nature, with Dolly being well-liked, and William being more closed off with a tendency to get into disputes, which Dolly was always there to resolve.
How old was the husband?
I think he was like 40 up.
Ew.
Yeah, he was a lot older. So Dolly continued to work at the textile mill in a supervisor role, as well as being a housewife. She tried her best to keep the flame of love alive in their marriage, but 15 years down the line, it just wasn't working.
Well, I mean, he is quite old, so it might not be working.
It's pretty early in the episode for the innuendos, Chris.
It's never too early for the innuendo.
William was putting all his time and energy into expanding demand in his factory, and rumour had it that at home he would rather drink than spend quality time with his wife. So Dolly's eye began to wander and settled on a potential new lover in the form of a 17-year-old sewing machine repairman who was hired by the factory.
It sounds like a vicious cycle.
Although he was a teenager, he looked much younger than he was, and he stood no taller than 5 feet. Was that ooh that you look much younger, or ooh that he was a short king?
That was like okay, like I was like right, I was oohing it that he looks much younger, and then the random fact that he was like under 5 foot tall.
So he looks like probably a literal child. Gross. Not gross for him. I mean, gross that Dolly's eye would settle on this potential suitor. So his name was Otto Sanhuber, and he soon found himself at the Oesterreich residence fixing a conveniently recently broken sewing machine belonging to the then 33-year-old Dolly, who was hovering over the young man, dressed in an evening gown as he worked.
Are you just reciting the plotline of a very bad porno?
Kind of.
I need you to fix my sewing machine. Fraulein.
Which I have deliberately broken. So soon Dolly had stopped going to work altogether, and Otto Sanhuber made repeated visits to the Oesterreich home while William was at work. So many visits, in fact, that neighbours started to notice and informed William. Dolly diffused the situation, which she was particularly good at, as we know, and convinced William that the neighbours' claims were nothing more than idle gossip. Dolly silenced the gossip mongers and curtain twitchers by telling them her gentleman caller was actually her long-lost brother, who was something of a vagabond who had been coming to visit. Suddenly, neighbours noticed that the mysterious young man stopped appearing altogether.
But that's kind of like if you tell the neighbours this story that is clearly false to your husband, who knows that he's one of his employees and not your long-lost brother. That's kind of asking for trouble, isn't it?
Well, I suppose they described him, and because he was just a sewing machine repairman, I don't think he was necessarily an employee. I don't know if he was like an outside contractor.
Oh, right, okay.
And also, I suppose they had so many people working there because he was expanding that he might not have known this particular guy.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm not sure why the neighbours wouldn't say, oh, I'm sorry about the gossip. It's her long-lost brother. We had no idea.
I didn't realise that was your long-lost brother.
And he's like, what?
My long-lost brother?
Dolly and Otto had been having a fling, no doubt, but the affair was so passionate that once Otto was in her home, Dolly did not want him to leave.
Oh, no.
So she came up with a way that she could continue to be the wife of a wealthy and successful local businessman, as well as fulfilling her needs and desires for a romantic affair. She secretly moved Otto into an area of the attic above the master bedroom.
Okay.
So, Chris, if someone was secretly living in your home, how quickly do you think you would notice, and what kind of telltale signs would you notice around the house?
Well, I would imagine... So, I don't know about this particular case, but I've heard of people living in people's walls and crawl spaces and basements and stuff before. And there's
Frogging.
Yeah. Oh, is that what it's called? Frogging?
I think so.
So when these people frog, they... There's all kinds of creepy videos online of people emerging from tiny little ventilation shafts and picking at the cheese and stuff.
Absolutely horrific.
So I can only imagine the types of signs that you would see would be signs of human life. There'd be food, there'd be waste, there would be... I mean, if you think just about the basic functions that you have to go through, you have to eat and it has to come out somewhere and that has to be disposed of somewhere.
Yeah.
So if they just started being I don't know, how can I put this? Random turds appearing... outside my bedroom window, I'd be like, huh.
So you think he's doing an old Victorian, just hoofing his waist outside the window, flinging it like a chimp.
So I imagine, that probably my first sign that I would notice would be when I kind of drew back the curtains and I shifted up the window pane, I stick my head out and I take a big inhale of breath. And then a giant turd hits me on the back of the head. I'd probably think, that's a bit weird.
But would you think someone's definitely squatting in my house secretly and making love to my wife while I'm away at work? Maybe not.
No, probably wouldn't be my first thought. I mean, it would probably take quite a lot for you to find out all of these details. I imagine there's signs of various things.
You may excuse
happening.
Things too.
Yeah.
Did I have a midnight snack? I don't remember.
Yeah. Maybe Dolly did it. I don't know.
Otto was kept secreted away for a decade. An entire 10 years.
Wow.
He was even smuggled along when they relocated to LA. Which is just insane to think about.
So, sorry, what year was this taking place?
The early 1900s, I would say, because she was born in 1880 and she's around 30.
Right.
So the early 1900s now.
So they moved from Milwaukee to LA.
Yes.
Which is quite a distance.
Yes.
And they smuggled this dude the whole time. How did they do it?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
So an entire 10 years, this guy was living in this man's house and having an affair with his wife.
Wow.
What do you think Otto's life looked like, secreted away in that attic?
I mean, I can't imagine it was particularly fun. Some parts of it. But I imagine...
Yeah, which parts would they be?
Well, I imagine it was basically the life of the prisoner with day release to have some fun time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dolly set the teenager up with the basics, like a basic bed and food, as well as a stack of paper and pens and science fiction books, so he could read and work on his own pulp sci-fi novels in the evenings.
Right.
Dolly would mail his manuscripts to various publishers. Otto actually had some success with his writing, and Dolly even opened a bank account for him where she could cash his checks. She also typed up his handwritten manuscripts for him. In the daytime, he would help around the house doing housework, and he and Dolly would have sex around 8 times a day. Otto would later describe himself as a sex slave.
Hubba, hubba.
Isn't that horrific, though? I mean, 17 years old...
Yeah, but...
She's in her mid-30s. He looks much younger. He doesn't have much life experience. He's shoved in an attic 8 times a day.
Yeah, this sounds like...
That's quite demanding.
It sounds like exploitation.
Yeah, and basically domestic servitude. He's doing housework.
Yeah.
What on earth?
Just a thought. So, I'm not overly familiar with the history of contraception, but I know that, like, condoms and stuff in their modern form wouldn't have been available at that time. If you're having sex 8 times a day, 7 times a week for 10 years. Is this going where I think it's going?
I suppose there's other ways to avoid.
Well, yeah.
Not to go into details here.
No.
Mother listens.
No, I mean that surely they would have been running that risk of pregnancy.
Yeah, I would
and
think so.
As you say, like it sounds like her actual husband, if they did ever have sex, it sounds like a sort of twice yearly event rather than something that happens, you know, like it's marked on the calendar.
Drunk
like
old overworked fool.
Yes, I've got to file the taxes on the 14th, and then on the 15th I've got dinner with the mayor, and the 16th it's time to have sex again. Well, it's barely been 6 months since the last time, darling.
Also, if they did still have some kind of romantic relationship, imagine being Otto, who's living above the master bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So Otto was finally busted one night after Dolly and William came home earlier than usual, and William found Otto in the kitchen, rummaging around getting some ice.
Oh.
Imagine.
Are you the ice repairman?
The Oesterreich relocated to LA around 1918. They had chatted about it at length, and Dolly told William that she would only move if she was allowed to choose their next abode. William agreed, and after searching high and low, Dolly eventually found a house with an attic for sale, which William purchased and they eventually moved into. Dolly made Otto travel ahead of them, so he would already be there before she and her husband moved in. And apparently it was quite difficult to find a house with an attic in LA at that time.
I wonder if I suppose LA was quite... We think of it as a big thing now, but it wasn't always. It was, you know, the west...
It kind of was where you would go to get famous, though. I mean, a lot of hopefuls.
Well, but what I'm saying is it's a newer town, and it's one that's exploded. You know, the west was the last part that was colonized, you know. So probably more of the buildings were a bit more modern, and maybe they forego things like traditional attics or basements.
Exactly.
And things like
it was difficult to find that. But Dolly found it. Dolly had to find it and sent poor Otto ahead.
She was pretty cold and calculating in all of this, wasn't she?
Yeah, she didn't give a damn, did she?
I mean, clearly she likes the lifestyle that she leads when it comes to the money and doesn't want to give that up. Because otherwise you wouldn't go to this lengths to hide an affair. You would just leave your husband.
Yeah, but that would have been so much more difficult for her. Like you said, her life would be a lot more difficult without him. And maybe she felt it... Oh, sorry.
But what I mean is, it would have been a lot more difficult. So she doesn't want to give that up.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I agree.
You know,
yeah, I agree. But keeping a man in the
attic I don't want what's in your pants, but I do want your wallet, boy.
I guess like what they tried to express in the retellings of this story is that they had an unhappy marriage.
I mean, I don't want to stereotype because there are people who have large age gaps and are very happy.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine the wealthy owner of a factory who's, about 30 years older than a young 17-year-old girl. But there's only one reason why they got married. It sounds like he lost interest in that quite quickly.
Yeah, he was sort of married to his business and then he was a drunk at home. And maybe she felt a bit betrayed by that and thought, well, why shouldn't I have some romance in my life? And then ended up doing this insane thing.
Yeah.
So William obviously had no idea that Otto was in the attic. However, he did voice to Dolly that he thought he was seeing and hearing things. He put this down to potentially having some kind of audio-visual hallucinations and even went to consult a professional about it, but the doctor couldn't explain it. Of course, when Dolly and William moved over the years, the noises continued, only reinforcing William's belief that he was experiencing hallucinations. Poor guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be playing a lot of tricks on him, and it's kind of gaslighting his
his
thoughts about this.
Of the world.
Like, am I being haunted by ghosts? No, your wife's just having an affair.
Yeah, but he actually thought she allowed him to believe. Obviously, she had to at that point because that is a insane thing to hide.
These are lies upon lies upon lies upon lies that are just building and building.
And he's going to think back to, remember that time with the icebox when there was a guy in our house? Like, she let this guy think that he was basically losing his marbles. He'd gone to the doctor. Imagine he's at the doctor talking about it, having a consultation, and she's like, yeah, I never hear those noises. Or William also noticed that their food didn't seem to last as long as it should, and that it was disappearing quicker than they seemed to be eating it. Some items were just plain missing, something William could not explain.
I've just got this image of him just rummaging through like the fridge and going, oh, my Wiener Schnitzel seemed to have gone down, but my wife, it doesn't go to her hips. To be young.
That poor man, can you imagine? The state he was in. His food's, he's looking at his wife and he's like, food's going, wife's still small. And then he's like, what's that noise? Did you hear that, darling? No.
At first, when you were telling this story, I thought this guy, he's like a lot older and in a position of power. He's married a young, pretty girl. This sounds a bit wrong. And at the end of the day, it sounds like he was totally innocent of this whole thing.
He was just a businessman trying to keep things going and expand his business. Maybe he was drinking a bit too much with the stress, but did he deserve this? Who knows?
So did he move his entire business from Milwaukee to LA? Or was the business still operating in Milwaukee and he was trying to expand into LA?
I assume that he was expanding into LA. He didn't lose his business or relocate it, I don't think. He's expanding. Okay. So his work life's probably going pretty well.
Yeah.
And his home life even improved because Dolly was happy.
Yeah.
But he didn't know why Dolly was so happy. All good things come to an end, Chris. And in late August of 1922, the jig was finally up for good. Otto was hiding out in the attic as usual when he heard Dolly and William arguing violently. Thinking Dolly's life was in danger, he climbed down from the attic and sneaked into the master bedroom, where he took 2 handguns from their place in the bureau. He then confronted William and told him to leave Dolly alone, and a struggle ensued. William was shot 3 times during the scuffle and died from his injuries. Chris, what do you think happened next?
The only logical conclusion here is that they hide the body and they try to deny all plausibility of this. She continues living in the house and operating his business, owning it at least. And they obviously can't come out and have this young boy immediately move into the house. So at least initially, he's got to be confined to the house, although he's no longer confined to his little cubbyhole.
You are a quick thinker, Chris. Unfortunately, Otto and Dolly were not. Knowing that the neighbours would have heard the gunshots, Otto had to think fast. He shoved Dolly into a closet and locked it from the outside. He then collected together some valuable items from the house, including a diamond watch that he slipped off William's wrist, and fled the scene, returning to his attic space, where he continued to live for an additional 8 years.
Right, okay, so he makes it look like a robbery and he goes back up to it's a perfect crime. Where did the killer go? He's still here.
When the police showed up, Dolly explained that it was a robbery gone wrong at the hands of an unknown assailant. The police were skeptical of her story, but they had no reason to hold her, so they released Dolly. She kept insisting that she and William had not fought once in 30 years of marriage, a statement that made detectives uneasy. Who doesn't have an argument in 30 years of marriage?
Yeah,
Come on.
Yeah, that seems a bit ridiculous.
Yeah. She's like, we never even fought once.
No.
Nothing amiss here.
Well, that's funny, miss, because neighbours reported hearing strange noises 8 times a day.
Some kind of scuffle and kerfuffle in there. Screaming and moaning and all sorts.
How do you explain that?
Dolly hired an attorney named Herman Shapiro after being suspected of William's murder. She soon began having an affair with the attorney, still keeping Otto in the attic, with their situation very much the same.
Oh my God, this woman.
Insatiable.
Yeah, insatiable. She's not the smartest cookie, is she?
She's horrific.
Yeah.
Like, if you think, right, everyone likes her, she's this diplomatic person, she's got such a good image on the outside, but she's keeping what was essentially, at the beginning, a teenage domestic servant and sex slave in the attic.
Who then committed murder for her, and to reward that devotion, she has an affair with somebody else.
She replaces the husband.
Yeah.
Keeps him in the attic, like...
It's like she still wants that dynamic.
Yeah. She didn't want Otto to be her husband. He's just a thing to her. Like, it's actually really horrific. So Shapiro became concerned after Dolly gifted him her dead husband's diamond watch, which she told police had been stolen in the robbery initially. What an idiot.
Yeah, she's not the smartest cookie here, is she?
No.
She seems quite... I mean, I don't want to make any assumptions because I don't... You're telling me the story, but I suppose... A 17-year-old working in a factory probably didn't have a tremendous amount of education prior to that. She's gone
experience.
Straight, or experience in anything. She's been thrown into this world where suddenly she is, I don't want to say an accessory, but she is a part of this business world and everything else that comes along with it. He said she moved up to a supervisory position and everything else. She's essentially risen through the ranks with very little experience to do so because she was married to the boss. And
yeah, she's got a power position, basically.
And also, like you said, she has got a knack for diplomacy. And probably the experiences she's had in the past has sort of maybe given her a false sense of security that she could talk her way out of anything.
She tried to convince Shapiro that she had found the watch later in the front yard and assumed the assailant had dropped it during the escape. Likely story. Dolly had a boyfriend at the time, Roy Clum, to whom she had given a pistol used in her husband's murder and asked him to dispose of it in a tar pit. She convinced him that it was not the murder weapon, but a similar gun which she felt uneasy having in the house, as she was worried police would find it and blame her.
She's weaving a lot of webs of mystery here, isn't she?
How does she have time for this?
Insatiable.
Like, having one partner, it takes up all of your time because you're spending all of your time with them. How do you manage to rotate? Well, I guess one in the attic, a boyfriend, and then an affair.
The only thing I can think of is that, like, she's addicted to the thrill of doing something wrong when it comes to relationships, and she's done this thing for so long with her husband being in the house, but now he's gone, so she needs to bring in somebody else, but he's not the husband. He doesn't live there. He's someone she's having a relationship with. So I know I'll have an affair and that will do... I don't know, but it seems like...
I get what you're saying. It's like she likes the thrill of
She's trying to connect these things. That there's got to be a bigger thrill and a bigger thrill and a bigger thrill.
Yeah. I mean, after someone murdering your husband in the house, I mean, where does it go from there?
I don't know, but please tell me.
So she had a neighbour bury the second handgun under a rose bush in his garden. Both firearms were located after Clum found out about Dolly's affair with Shapiro and snitched on her to the police. So the neighbour's even involved in this.
What was she doing to the neighbour?
Exactly, you've got to wonder, not to judge, but it seems to be how she gets people to do things for her.
It seems like she's got one method of getting people to do things for her, and yeah it wouldn't surprise me.
I guess this fake romantic relationship thing is also a way that people lure people into other things like trafficking, cults, and all sorts. So I suppose it does work.
I mean, like you said, she was in her 30s here, and, presumably still very beautiful. And
she's a lot older now. Otto was in the attic for another 8 years.
Oh, well, still 38 or 40s, it's not like she was, 75.
So, Chris, I have a couple of pictures of Dolly here for you to look at. If you could describe her to the people.
That is not what I was picturing. So I don't want to be unfair to somebody. She's certainly not ugly, but she's also not good looking in any way. So she's just in her 40s when this picture was taken.
She could be a little bit older, but yeah, she's...
So what I'm trying to say is that she looks like she's well into her late 60s at best.
Do you think so?
I mean, in that second picture...
So the first picture is a close-up of Dolly's face, like a portrait. And the second picture is her sitting in a chair with her hands on her lap. She's got a little 1920s...
mink around her...
Yeah, mink scarf, a little hat. She looks...
I mean, what I'm trying to say here is, he says she's got her hands in her lap. She also appears to have her breasts in her lap as well.
Chris!
All I'm saying is, like... this is like the antithesis of what I was expecting. So I was expecting somebody who still looked very young for their age, still had a very, youthful figure and, was traditionally quite beautiful. Obviously, there's differences between what would be the beauty standards at the time and what are now. But like I said, she looks much older than she is. And
I think you were expecting a movie starlet, who's winning over all of these men with like a flutter of her eyelashes.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
Dolly is a very unassuming lady.
I had an image in my head that you've just shattered.
I'm sorry, Chris. You could have potentially been one of Dolly's victims. I think that's what we've learned.
Maybe if we had telephone communication, but if we're FaceTiming, I'm not...
Chris. After Dolly's arrest on suspicion of the murder of her husband, she asked Shapiro to do a welfare check on whom she told him was her vagabond brother who had been living in her attic.
Oh, dear.
When Shapiro went to the home, he found Otto, pale as a ghost and underweight, hiding out in the attic. Otto did not go along with the story that he was Dolly's vagabond sibling, and instead confessed to the entire story to, I imagine, a horrified Shapiro.
Yeah, I mean, he's personally involved in all of this as well, so it's not just like, oh, what a story, it's more like, what have I been involved in?
Yes, I mean, imagine going to the house where you've been spending time with your girlfriend or Dolly or your mistress, whatever you want to call her. You go to the attic, there's a pale, malnourished man in there, and he goes, oh, you must be Dolly's brother. And he's like, no, I'm a sex slave and domestic servant whom she captured at the age of 17, and I've been locked in her attic for the majority of my life.
Yeah, he must be like, what, early 30s?
Yeah.
Early 30s
Yeah,
now?
he's getting on at this point.
I mean, he's been, if you think about it, like you said, he had some reading material and some writing material, and that's really it. He's been cut off from the world, more or less.
Yeah, I can't imagine who he's seen other than when he had to travel ahead of them to go to LA.
Yeah.
And he didn't, obviously he was so deep in it, and I imagine brainwashed by this point.
Yeah, sounds like
Dolly,
it.
that he actually didn't think, time to run away. He thought, okay, gotta go into my little attic room in LA now. Crazy.
Crazy story.
The twisted tale leaked to the media, and Otto earned his media moniker, the Batman.
The Batman.
Because he lived in an attic.
I am the Batman.
Imagine you've gone through that and people go, oh, haha, the Batman lived in an attic.
This would have been well before Batman as well, right? That was like 1940s that started, I think.
Was it?
So according to this, Batman debuted in Detective Comics on March 30th, 1939.
Oh. Otto Sandhuber was charged with manslaughter. But by then, the statute of limitations had well expired and he was released.
Oh.
He ran away to Canada, changed his name, and married before eventually moving back to LA. Dolly was acquitted and the indictment was dropped in 1936. She continued to live in LA until her death at 80 years old.
Wow, what the hell did you look like at 80?
The Crypt Keeper.
Hello, boys!
You know what? We joke, but I
have a boy living in my attic.
But listen, let's not be too hard on her here. I mean, we've all got attics. We've all got it,
We're in an attic right now.
We're in an attic now and with a boy. No. But yeah, I wonder if she'd She continued to do things like that. I mean,
so there was no more reports, no more stories about her. She kind of disappears from the press after
not
this
that
time.
I saw when I was researching it, but I would have to look into it more, and I think I will. There could be
a part
Dolly
two.
Part 2 coming. But yeah, that is the story of Dolly. What do you think about that, Chris?
I mean, that's kind of shocking, to be honest. I mean, I think everything kind of makes sense within it, but it's the length of time that it all happens for.
Does it make sense, Chris?
Well, what I mean is I can see somebody doing that and saying, oh, you can live in the attic, it'll be fine. But the fact that it rumbled on and on and on and on and on for years and years and years without anybody finding out or, any inkling that this was the case being dismissed is just shocking, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the fact that they moved from Milwaukee to LA.
Crazy.
And she was, gaslighting her husband and they eventually murder him. And then she continues on. And the fact that nobody did any jail time for this.
Yeah, apparently not.
I mean, the statute of limitations, I thought that was something and I guess every state's different and things like that. But I thought that
I'm
was
not sure back then as well.
And I suppose differs via crime and so on. I'm not sure. But it seems shocking to me that it'd be like, well, we know you murdered a man, but looks like enough time's passed on the clock that you must be innocent.
I guess Otto did it.
Well, I mean, I'm shocked
it was
he didn't do any
manslaughter
jail
charge, because it wasn't premeditated in any way. He thought they were in danger, so maybe the statute of limitations was a bit less for that. I don't know.
Maybe.
But nobody did any time for it.
I suppose it would all come down to if Otto wanted to press charges, because we're describing this as like a sex slave, somebody living, against their own will. But he entered into this by his own will originally, and then it became something else. So it depends how he views this case.
These days it would be different.
Yeah, these days you'd be...
Like he was a child, basically.
Yeah.
17.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
Well, thanks for telling me that wonderful story of sex, love, and Venus Schnitzel at this time in the morning.
There's a lot of Venus Schnitzel going around.
Up to 8 times a day. Are you getting all your Venus Schnitzel nutrient?
Your daily allowance.
Your daily allowance.
What, 8 a day?
So you can...
But yeah, Chris, the next time you open the fridge and you think...
Didn't I have more Baby Bell than that?
Exactly. Maybe you should check the attic.
I will do. I'll make sure to check the attic. Thank you very much, Linz, for telling me that very interesting and unusual story. We hope you enjoyed it too. If this is your first time listening to us, we are Dystopian Simulation Radio. We broadcast on your favourite podcast network every other week, more or less. Sometimes we do every single week, and we're actually just coming to the end of it. So this is, we just did 4 episode February. And how did you find that in terms of workload?
That was pretty hardcore to keep up with. But... it's really nice to release one a week. I think people would prefer that, but let's see, maybe in the future.
So we're going to be returning back to our normal schedule now, but I think we'll definitely try this again. As we talked about before, I've got a baby on the way, so it probably won't be in the next couple of months, but maybe a little bit later on this year we can fire out a few more episodes.
Yeah, definitely. For now, we're back to a schedule of 2 episodes a month, so 1 every 2 weeks on Monday.
So join us next time in 2 weeks, where you'll be able to hear a very interesting story. We cover all sorts of things from UFOs to strange goings-ons in the world and even just individual people's stories like we did today that go very awry.
If you have the questions, we have the answers.
And until next time, we'll see you then.